Welcome to Canonical. I'm James Shao, and I'm joined, as always, by Sam Spieler and Iad Darris.
Hey.
Hello, hello.
Good evening. Today we are reviewing the second book in our series on contemporary Nigerian fiction with Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Americanah. If this is your first time joining us, we are a literary book club on Reddit. You can join our discussion on Reddit by clicking on the link in the episode description. You can support us and your local bookstore by using our bookshop.org link. That's also in our episode description. We are also on social media at Canonical Pod. Next week, we'll have an in-depth discussion of this book. We hope you'll join us for that episode as well. Sam, this was your pick for this series. Can you tell us something about this book?
Yeah. Adichie is one of Nigeria's most prominent contemporary novelists. Her work has won a ton of awards, and she's become a very international figure and outspoken feminist. She's got some worthwhile TED Talks out there that you can find. I'd encourage you to watch some of them. This book, Americanah, isn't her first book, but I think it's probably what she's most known for. It was published in 2013. I heard about it a couple years ago, and I've been wanting to read it since then. And the title of this book, Americanah, refers to Nigerians who have returned home Americanized after living in the US. This book's perspective is split between the main characters Ifemelu and Obinze, though it focuses a bit more centrally on Ifemelu.
A lot more centrally.
Yeah, I guess we get maybe a third of it is Obinze. It follows the two of them as they fall in love with each other in their youth, then move through their separate lives, Ifemelu as she moves to the US to study, and Obinze as he tries to live and work in London. Through the characters' blogging, Adichie uses Ifemelu as a proxy to explore different social and cultural issues in the US and Nigeria, as she navigates both places as both a local inhabitant and an outside observer.
We should also add that the central plot is the romance between them. By the way, in this episode, we are not going to be discussing the whole plot because we won't be revealing any spoilers. There are quite a few spoilers here. We will be discussing those plot points next episode.
I really enjoyed this book, though I think both writers would hate this comparison. I thought this was a nice change of pace coming off the heels of our last book, The Death of Vivek Oji. I really liked that book too, but I felt like it was missing something, mostly in the prose. Immediately on starting this, I was into it. It's clever and it brings up some interesting perspectives on those social and cultural issues that I mentioned. And it's long, but it held my attention most of the way through, even though there were a few things that slowed it down at various points. I did feel there are times when the book verges a bit close on the romance genre. This is largely about Ifemelu and Obinze's romance together and how it winds in and out. But I felt like that was kind of a distraction a lot of the time. Also, some of the characters feel very real, while others feel much more comical and caricatured. But that's all right. I didn't really have a problem with that. I did want to see more of Nigeria, but I felt like the book slowed down once we returned there. I don't think that's a spoiler since pretty much from the beginning, we're told that she's going to return, right?
Right. Yeah, we begin the novel in this frame story where she's already on the verge of returning. And then a lot of the story is just this flashback to when she's in Nigeria and when she's living in America.
Which felt a little weird to me considering how much of the time she's in America versus how much of the time we spend saying that she's about to return. Some of the book's points, specifically the points that are given to us through this blog, are pretty heavy-handed in that same caricature feel. But all in all, I really enjoyed this. It's not perfect, but it's really good.
My reaction to this book was much the same as yours, Sam. I thought that this novel was flawed, but I loved reading the novel. Even though it's quite long, my copy came in at almost 600 pages, and I was invested in the book the entire way, even the parts that were kind of slow. I was still into it. I think you mentioned that her style was much better, or that's what kept you in the book. And I agree. I think she writes with what I'm calling observational wisdom. It's a style that I used to dislike when I was reading a lot of minimalist work, but now I've grown to appreciate it a lot. And this style is what makes the book work for me. It's very expansive as a novel. It takes place over three continents. It takes on race, class, privilege, power, and there are a lot of characters, probably too many characters, but the style, her voice, holds it all together. You feel like you're undergoing this journey with an author that knows how to write and an author that has things to say. So, because of that, I'm with it the entire way. I do have, as I said, some criticisms of the book. It's not very subtle. She uses blogs in the story as kind of like a giant foam finger to point at issues. The plot could have been trimmed down, especially the hair salon sections, I thought were kind of weak. The romance, the kind of will they, won't they plot line, I thought was fine, though I did find the ending of the book kind of abrupt. I just think overall, with these flaws, if this was written by a lesser writer, this book would be terrible. But because of her skill, I think she makes it a very enjoyable journey to take with her. Her prose is just fantastic. It just carries me through all 588 pages. I love the voice, and even after finishing the book, I felt the urge to just revisit it, just to read sections of it. So, despite the novel's imperfections, I found this book to be probably one of my favorite books of the year. Probably the best book since Parable of the Sower. I might even like it more than that. Maybe the best book since Galapagos for me.
I agree with both of you. I like this novel quite a bit. I think that Adichie is a very good writer when it comes to observation. This novel is very keenly observed and it's very smart. It has a lot of things to say. What I would say differently compared to you two is that I think that the genre of the novel is sometimes at odds with itself. I think it's trying to be two things. It's a Bildungsroman and also a social commentary. And it feels long, and I think that that length causes trouble because it's good for a Bildungsroman. It deepens our portrait of this character and our interest in her life, but it also stretches the social commentary in the novel pretty thin.
So, yeah, do you think it's possible for a book to be both a Bildungsroman and a social commentary?
I think it can be done, but I think the issue is the length specifically because this is a long novel and it felt long. When novels are long and that length adds to the overall effect, I think it's fine. But with a social commentary, it's a big problem just because the worst part of a social commentary is when it starts to feel redundant. That's the way I felt with a lot of the social commentary and the blog posts, specifically in this novel. But with a Bildungsroman, the length is not a problem as long as the character remains interesting and we care about the character's life. It adds to it and it makes the novel even more successful.
I generally agree here because I think the biggest problem for me, and I think it also goes to what you're pointing out, are the blog posts. I think if this book did not have the blog posts, it would actually solve a lot of the problems that you're pointing out.
I mean, it would be a little bit shorter, but not short enough. Like, I think that Adichie is a smart writer and she has a lot to say, but maybe not 588 pages. Maybe even more should be cut. Maybe even more concision is necessary than that.
It's funny that I thought the blog posts were cute at the beginning, and then the more they kept happening, the more it felt almost precious. I mean, that's a kind of mean word to use, but precocious feels apt as well.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the blog posts is that they're written in a voice which is Ifemelu's voice, but it's also different because it's written as a blog. And as a blog writer, Ifemelu becomes this very sardonic, sort of critical observer.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is contrary to my interest in her as the main character of a Bildungsroman. She is very sympathetic in person, but when she's writing, she just comes off as a know it all. And that, to me, I think, makes her less interesting than other characters in the novel, like Obinze.
Yeah. I kept waiting for her to get called out sufficiently on that attitude, especially because it develops more and more as the story goes on. And it never really happens. There's a section toward the end, I believe, where someone gets in an argument with her and points out that attitude that you're talking about, that sardonic kind of nature that she has that doesn't really, it feels separate. And it was a fairly minor point, even though it was something that I certainly felt in the book. And so I thought it was going to be something that was really addressed, but it wasn't.
I think there's a third genre that this plays with, which is the romance. And this is what you mentioned. I don't want to give away the ending because I feel like the ending really matters to some people, but that's where the romance aspect of this novel really kicks up into high gear. And that to me was the least interesting by far. It became a big disappointment. It almost feels maybe not incoherent, but it doesn't feel like the same novel. I think that Adichie is a good writer when she's dealing with ideas about social class and race and nationality, but it's like she has this tendency or this kind of inherited interest in romance and inherited interest in just are they going to be together? Are they going to not be together? And that to me, it just seems like something that doesn't belong.
It's funny, James mentioned it as a will they, won't they romance.
Yeah.
And that's how I felt. Well, it's presented as a will they, won't they, except it's expected that they will.
Yes. You get a strong hint.
And it never really deviates from that. Yeah, it's a very strong hint. I agree already with you about the romance aspect, but because of that hinting, it made the romance even less interesting.
I think I can make a distinction here a little bit in that what I thought was really interesting in Obinze, and I also found him to be a more compelling character in a lot of ways. What I think is most interesting is that he has a very true to life internal conflict where he has a lifestyle where he seems very outwardly successful by society's standards anyway, but he's unhappy. That's very compelling. The will they, won't they feels tacked on because it's built on top of that. For Obinze, it almost doesn't matter that this other character's Ifemelu. It could have been some other woman. I mean, it really could have. It could have been another person who he resonates with, who he thinks is a better fit. The book sets it up as Ifemelu, but really his internal conflict is really interesting because he has this unhappiness with his life. If you just look at his character and the character arc, what's important is his decision to marry Kosi and how that seemingly is the wrong decision for him because he doesn't really like Kosi for different reasons that are explored. And then you also, in the section where he's in London, you get a sense of what he actually is like, and maybe he's searching for something different. So the fact that he might end up with Ifemelu, it's kind of like she's just a totem, right? Like she just stands in for the something else. what I think makes him the more compelling character is I don't think that internal conflict is as present or as obvious in Ifemelu. I think throughout the book, her conflict is largely based on societal factors. It's very abstract. And because of that, you don't, as a reader, ever really get a firm handle on what is it exactly that is making her unhappy and what is it exactly that she needs to fix or tackle head on, which is fine. But because of this kind of mushiness, I think it's just easier to grab onto Obinze and understand him and think through his conflict. It's much harder to think through Ifemelu's conflict.
They do talk about her having depression, and that kind of works with what you're talking about, that there's this kind of low-level background depression that she doesn't even really fully understand, and there is no cultural understanding for her for the depression. But that doesn't make it a compelling thing to read. Like you said, that makes it kind of this muddled apprehension about things. And because she feels muddled and doesn't have a strong motive for what she wants, or a strong idea of what she wants, that makes it tougher on the reader. Even if I understood that mushiness, as you put it, it doesn't make it a compelling read.
In terms of Ifemelo and the contrast that you're drawing between her story and Obinze's story, I think the difference that I see and what makes her story a little bit less satisfying is what you had mentioned, that his story is very contained and discreet. We can see how it works. But I think her arc, and it's not just her, but all of the characters in the novel kind of simultaneously go through this arc of how they feel about Nigeria as opposed to how they feel about everywhere else in the world. Like that's the kind of meta arc that I think all of the characters undergo. But for Ifemelu, that's the central thing that changes in her. And I think that it makes it feel mushy because it's not so discrete. You can't point to one particular point to say, this is when we understand what's changing about her, but rather it happens to everybody.
Near the end of the book, it's revealed that something she did and regretted earlier on in her life when she was in America, when she was young, that was the cause of a lot of problems. And firstly, I don't think I totally buy it. I know in that moment, yes, like I buy it. But I think when you consider the entirety of the novel, I don't buy it. I don't think that event really is the cause of a lot of other plot points, a lot of other problems in her life.
You mean because it's not explored except when it happens a little bit after the fact and then much later?
Yes. Yeah, it's not explored. And also, it doesn't explain away other parts of the plot, you know? If it is truly something that is life-changing, then the story needs to take it on. But it seems to just be dropped once that one section of the book ends, and then gets picked up again later on. I have kind of a global comment here, and maybe it's a bit unfair because I think that what Adichie does very well is write about race and even write about Obinze, but maybe this character, Ifemelu, is just too close to her. You know, when you write about yourself, you don't ever really fully understand yourself. This character isn't, fabricated. She is not Obinze. I mean, she is much closer to Ifemelu as a person, I think, than Obinze, obviously. So I think that's the cause of this kind of mushiness. The writer, it seems, has a very clear idea of who Obinze is as a character, has a very clear idea on race, on class, on social strife, on political movements, on, what it's like to be an African immigrant in America. But in this case, I think the writer doesn't have a firm idea on Ifemelu, this character specifically. maybe because it's just too close to herself.
I could see that. Kind of going off of what you said, Iad, about that arc. One of the things I did like about this is the challenge to the idea of the American dream. I don't know if I fully felt the character's firm desire for Nigeria, even though I think maybe that's supposed to be there. But I did feel their discomfort and disappointment with both America and the UK. I understood why they didn't feel at ease in either place. And I think that was done really well. And there's kind of this reversal that I think we're going to talk about next episode. The challenge to the American dream, kind of a reverse aspect of that.
There's something else, and this, I don't know if it's even a little bit important, but something that kind of bothered me as I read this book, and once again, I really did love this book, is it has that kind of Friends quality where these are like, in Friends, they're mid 20s, 30s something people living in Manhattan, the most expensive place in the world, and they just happen to get by. Like, I get that sense with the characters where they just happen to, like, they're not failing upwards, but they just happen to to end up living very comfortable lives. Where Obinze's like this upper middle class person in Nigeria, and Ifemelu strikes gold with his blog. And I think, it's not without reason. Like, it's in the book because I think Adichie wants to touch on this idea of social mobility. But at the same time, while reading the book, I'm just like, man, life is sure coming easy for these people.
I understood it for Obinze. I know what you mean. I understood it for Obinze because of his background, because of his connections, that he made a point of making connections. Like there's that character Chief at the beginning. Obinze made himself a go-getter and climbed the social ladder. That was something I kind of found interesting in his story, is that he was a somebody in Nigeria, but once he goes to the UK, he's a nobody. But I agree about the blog. I know people make money from blogs, but this also isn't the 90s anymore. How many people who aren't already famous strike it rich from a blog?
I mean, it's like if we were to make, I don't know, a podcast, and then a year in, suddenly we can quit all our jobs.
What? No.
And then a year after that, we get a fellowship from Yale, or other Ivy League college. Like, come on. Is it just that easy?
Well, I wonder if this is part of what you're talking about, being too close to herself. That not that she necessarily took that exact path, but maybe she thinks that path is similar enough to what she did, so then it somehow makes sense for this character.
What I think is missing here, and this is an unanswered question from my end, but what specifically are Adichie's politics? Because it seems to me like she could be saying with these characters and their upward mobility that these lives and these characters are interesting because they are mobile, rather than saying that these are people who are interesting who happen to be mobile. And I think that there's a distinction there that may become more apparent in the next episode when we talk more about what I see as kind of the patriotic or nationalistic bent of this novel. But I do think that there is a sense that it's more that these people are interesting and worth talking about specifically because they are movers and shakers. It is, in my mind, a very conservative, authorial sort of voice that Adichie is writing with.
Well, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about why we dislike this book that we loved. I think we're due for a break. We'll be right back. Hi. If you liked Americanah, you might also want to listen to a series we did some time ago, Race in Contemporary America. We read Sag Harbor by Colson Whitehead, The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, and There by Tommy Orange. We also did a series on immigration called The Impossibility of a New Home. For that series, we read Austerlitz by W.G. Sebald, The Buddha in the Attic by Julie Otsuka, and Signs Preceding the End of the World by Yuri Herrera. And the series before that was Afrofuturism. In Afrofuturism, we read Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, Colson Whitehead's The Intuitionist, our second Colson Whitehead, and Ishmael Reed's Mumbo Jumbo. You can find these episodes in our archives. Check them out. And we're back. So let's talk about who we would recommend this book to. I'm guessing, Sam, you will say everybody?
Yeah, everybody.
You're like almost, well, I don't know how many books we've read so far,
I
but
don't
you're
say
like
that all
almost
the
batting
time.
a
I really
1,000,
don't.
you know.
I don't say that all the time. I swear I don't. But I mean, honestly, this is one of those books like, this is one of those books like The Vanishing Half. I think a lot of people would be into this. The prose aside, which is excellent, the subject matter, I think people would really enjoy. I think it's pretty broadly appealing.
This is a book club book.
Yes,
And
exactly.
We've talked quite a bit about how we're a book club that actually doesn't really like book club books. And we like this one. If it gets EAD's stamp of approval and it has widespread appeal, I think it would be everyone. Except for, once again, my caveat, except for the racists. They probably wouldn't like it.
You have to have a connection to America. You have to care about America in some specific way. I think that it's not just Nigerians, but people in a different context with no real relationship to America will feel less interested, because I think that is the other half of this kind of international relationship, which may not feel resonant with a lot of other people. But I think that there are so many people who have this kind of, they're gazing longingly at America from afar. There are enough of those people out there that I think that this has a wide readership, or a wide potential readership.
I don't know. I think Iad's right that they don't necessarily have to have a connection to Nigeria, but if they don't give a care at all about America, then they probably won't be interested in it.
I think it works well for those people in the world who look at America and they're starstruck. They look at America as an aspirational place. And I think that the novel does well to disabuse people of that idea, but you have to have that idea in the beginning, at least, to understand what's going on here. And I think that there are lots of people out there who have this view of America. But I think if we thought of it just like a novel about Nigerians moving to America, we would look at it differently compared to a novel about Nigerians moving to the UK. That I think we would be much less enthusiastic about.
I don't think they have to share that vision or dream of America, but I think they have to have an understanding of that idea, that a lot of people feel that way. Because you're right, this does do a lot of work disabusing that dream. I don't think they have to share it. I think they just have to understand it.
So I don't think I'm insulting our listeners because our listeners are smart, but would you recommend this book to dum-dums? Like people who just, don't have an idea in their head at all? Because this book, I mean, it is demanding upon the reader something. Even if it's not a very, very intellectual exercise, it is, first it's long, but it also really demands from the reader, some consideration of race. What about people who just want to have a good time?
Honestly, I think this is so broadly appealing for the most part that I don't think it'll be that big a deal.
Yeah, people who are like, I can only do 588 pages, 589. No, that's too much.
The people that would have the most problem with this are the people that would have a problem with her voice. The people that would have a problem with that kind of self-righteous or self-important sense that we get from her blog.
I think it's those dum-dums that you're talking about. Like, the dumber you are, the smaller that foam finger will seem. Like, for us, it seems like point, 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 but for them, it'd be like, oh, finally, I can get it. Like, they enjoy that pointing.
You don't think they'd have a problem with that? You think the more dumb they are, the greater that blog will be?
I think that if you read this novel, you're self-selecting yourself into a certain politics and a certain sensibility, which is fine because we do that with every book. But I think that if you are not as up to speed on race issues and not as critical a thinker on race issues, that will really help you because the blog is very plain spoken and you can say, oh, I can see what this is and I can see how this blog post is connected to the rest of the novel. It's kind of like reading cliff notes in the novel at the same time because the blog posts are showing you the themes of the rest of the novel.
Man, if only we could get 2 copies of this book. One without the blog posts and the other with only the blog posts. Like, what if someone just, got the galley copy of this, snipped out all the blog posts, and made it into an appendix? And then, similar to a translator's note, you don't even have to read the end with the blog posts. You can just, just read it or not read it.
Well, Adichie does have her own website. I don't know what's on it, but
Actually, I was looking it up right now because she has on her website a section called Ifemelu's blog.
oh no.
And there is a description of a woman's reproductive system.
Oh, but it stopped in 2014, the year after this came out. So
It's just a publicity stunt.
yeah, this is not something she's kept up with, at least.
Yes, but it seems like this is some sort of tie-in that she approved, which makes me think that it says something about her sensibility.
And she really kept up with it in character. Like, one of the entries is called Ifem and Sealing. And Sealing is her nickname for Obinze.
We gotta check her book that was published, like 3 years ago and see if it has Snapchat in it. Like, do you think with each subsequent book, she just uses a new social media platform?
I hope not, because honestly, this is already getting kind of dated just in terms of how easy it seems for her to be successful with her blog, that it would be really going to date her later works if it's all just like, hey, I'm on TikTok now. Let's write about TikTok.
Maybe her latest book is just on TikTok or OnlyFans.
Oh, man.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. I think we'll stop here. If you thought we were way off base with our review of this book, and frankly, I don't see how because we were all pretty positive about this book, and I'm assuming if you listen to us, you'll like this book too. Anyway, you can let us know on Reddit what you think about Americanah. You can find that link once again below. We are also on social media at Canonical Pod. If you enjoyed this podcast, it'd be nice of you to give us a review on Apple or your podcast platform of choice. Next week, we'll be back with an in-depth discussion of Americanah. If you're interested in joining our discussion, please go ahead, find a copy of this book. It is long. You will need to budget some time for this one. Till next time, happy reading. We'll talk to you soon.